Welcome to the conversation from the Corinne Woodman Gallery. Today we have Mark Meyer, photographer, and in this case particularly vintage cars. And we have Sam Hoffman, ceramics. And I'm going to give them the microphone, and I'm going to stand back there and pepper you with questions. And if you have a question, please feel free to stick up your hand. Most of the times I see that. And we'll honor that because it needs to be a conversation. So, Mark, there you go. Well, Mark, now that you are holding the microphone.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your background and how you became a photographer.
Okay, so this all originated in 1957. Our family lived in Missouri at the time. Our house was wiped out, leveled to the ground by a tornado. And we had never been on a family vacation before that. My dad always invested time and energy making the house, upgrading the house. They saw the futility of that, so the next summer we took a vacation and they bought me my first camera. We went to Rocky Mountain National Park, and I've been in love with photography and cameras ever since.
1957, that's 60, 70 years ago?
About 60 something.
Wow. Yeah, right. So you've photographed, so you are a professional photographer?
No, I'm an engineer by profession. I retired in 2012, so it's been 5 years ago. But I've been an engineer my whole career, and photography, I did some professional work early on in the 70s. Sold stuff, had exhibits, did jobs, illustrated books, that sort of thing. But most of the since to like 1980, I'm purely amateur and having fun.
Okay. So those are connected, being an amateur and having fun.
To me, because a lot of professional jobs are major. It's hard work.
Yeah, I like that because the word amateur quite often has a slightly negative connotation. Well, it is not. It is somebody who loves something.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Sam, tell us a little bit about your background and how you've become a potter.
I came into clay with a background in mathematics and chemistry. I was studying hard sciences, had always explored the arts. And I was also, as an undergraduate student, interested in Eastern religion, yoga and meditation. And when I sat down at a potter's wheel, it was as if these three, up to that point, different parts of my life came together. I found centering and throwing clay to be particularly meditative, also very expressive, and there is a lot of chemistry and physics and math in the art of clay. And so it turned out to be a perfect balance for me. I committed my life to becoming a potter, and in 1997 my wife and I took a big Western United States tour, and Corvallis, Oregon was our favorite city. So I started an apprenticeship here with a porcelain potter and have been a studio potter ever since.
So those three elements, science, spirituality, and the arts, do you think they have to be together? They cannot live without each other?
For me, yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, that was what was so eye-opening and energizing about working in clay, is that just naturally these three components of existence, of life that I found so fascinating, came into this one art form. I wouldn't say that's true for everybody. And in fact, I really respect the idea of using an art or any kind of a passion as a disconnect from your normal life. I feel very fortunate to have been able to encompass it into my career and my profession.
Yeah, I think you both are at different sides of the spectrum. Mark saying he's an amateur and you're being a professional artist for a long time.
Mark, photography requires some science too. Do you feel there's a little bit of a spot for the less tangible things of life in photography as well?
I think so. Yeah, I think those are what the photographs, what you're attempting to catch is that. I mean, at least to my mind, it's the science part of it are the tools that enable you to get to your vision, whatever it is you saw that you want to pass on, try to pass on to other people. So I think it's a necessity.
So you both are pursuing a art form that requires some knowledge, some technical knowledge. I know that I make a lot of photographs on my cell phone, and I wouldn't call myself a photographer. So even though it is nowadays easy to shoot, it still requires. Do you feel what attracted you to an art form that has so much skill requirements? Because before digital, you also printed in
Oh yeah.
darkroom, right?
Right. I think that's part of the attraction for me. I always like tools and equipment and mechanisms and things. So I fell in love with the camera as much as the photography first.
Did that change over time?
I think it has, yeah. I get more. The real excitement is what comes out the other end of the pipeline, not the tool that you use to get it there. So I'm much less enamored of the equipment than I used to be.
Before the talk, we talked a little bit, and you mentioned that you really got back into photography again when digital came on the whatever stage, I guess. What made that such a big thing in photography, going to this digital versus the film and darkroom?
Well, at some point, at least in my mind, around 2008, the digital technology started to clearly surpass film. So it had better resolution, better color rendition, all sorts of things. But it also gives you complete control. When I do film stuff, even when I process my own film, I've got to buy all this chemicals and stuff and send it out. It just wasn't. You didn't have control. The film would come back. You exposed it correctly, but they underdeveloped it or overdeveloped it. So you do that, and the same thing with the papers. You get all this work you have to do.
Could you also say you have more freedom?
Oh yeah. Like in the intervening years since 2008, that's 9 years, the technology's gone so far. I mean, right now I can shoot at a film sensitivity level of 10,000, and it's better than it used to be at 800 9 years ago.
Yeah.
It's just so that you don't have to buy expensive lenses because they don't open up very fast or wide, or it doesn't matter anymore. You just make the film more sensitive, make your digital sensor more sensitive. It's huge.
Has your photography changed in that shift?
Oh, I think so. That's what made the vintage car work come alive, was having that capability. In the post-production, I can do things that enhance and bring out the parts of the image that I couldn't have done in film. Excuse me.
There's a question.
Mark, you have pictures of these pretty amazing cars. Where are you finding these vehicles?
I go to a lot of car shows. These are all car shows.
Okay. At car shows. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a difficult environment. It's kind of like a sport almost. There are so many people and so many obstacles and cables and green coolers and blue coolers and tarps.
Yeah, because I was thinking maybe you took this in a garage or something. I mean, I can see it's in grass, but at someone's home. Okay.
Right, and this particular picture on the upper right, there's a blue cooler and a blue tarp. I had to darken it severely to hide that. Otherwise, the picture doesn't work. You look at the blue tarp, so.
So you work in a very uncontrolled environment, but you have a lot of control. Sam, you work in a very controlled environment because you made your studio yourself, so you did it the way you wanted. So how does that work for you? And do you have that control/freedom? It's funny, control is freedom.
Well, I think that's a good point to highlight. And when I first started working in clay, specifically working in wood-fired ceramics, surprise, serendipity, mystery was a huge part of the appeal. And I would say I was not very knowledgeable of the process. And every firing felt a little bit like a roll of the dice, inherent in the wood firing process. There are a lot of happy accidents and surprises, but I would say over the past decade, I feel almost a complete reversal of my participation with wood firing. I feel now I'm not necessarily waiting for some surprise to happen to grace my work. I feel like I'm setting my pieces up for anticipated effects. And in that sense, I feel like I'm putting more of my artistic aesthetic into the work than I was perhaps a decade ago. And I also work alone in my studio, but when I go to fire wood kilns, I fire with other potters. And so there is an inherent loss of control in that sense. But I've been firing with the same potters now for almost a decade. And so what was once uncontrollable and felt a little scary on that sense, now I have faith, comfort, and almost excitement to see how my firing crew will fire the kiln and load the work.
Could you, the pot next to you is usually in the gallery, but I picked this one because it seemed to have several elements that you could talk about. Could you say a little bit where you created the circumstance to get the effect that you wanted, and did it work?
Absolutely. When I first started wood firing, I made it an intention and a point of pride to put all of my pieces into the kiln with no glaze and no slip to simply receive the effects of the wood flame. And over time, I started to learn what those effects held and how they would change the aesthetic of a vessel or a plate. And so this piece, for me, exemplifies how I'm using different layers of my own applied aesthetic and combining that with perhaps more serendipitous aesthetic of the wood kiln. So this piece, I intentionally, before I put it in the kiln, I put a few layers of my applied decoration. There's a slip, you can see these circles. Those are all marks that I'm making on the piece. And those look rather cold going into the kiln. They're very crisp circles. And I put this piece in a zone in the kiln that is quite a risky spot. It's actually in a firebox. Wood is stoked on top of the piece during the firing. As a result, the piece has very dramatic marks where the fire touched the piece and how the fire and the embers interacted, both with the clay itself and with the slip and glazes that I applied. At their best, I feel like the combination of the wood-fired effects with my effects kind of bring a layer of depth to the piece that can't happen any other way.
So there's still an element of surprise.
There is.
Because you've created circumstances.
That's right. And I feel like I'm now segregating pieces back, perhaps that are successful in terms of they could hold flowers, they're not broken, but perhaps the aesthetic doesn't reach my standards. And so sometimes I'll take a piece out of the kiln that I wasn't so enthusiastic about in the making, but then the way that I fired it or the way it was glazed turns out shining. And it's also kind of the nature of this process that the pieces we invest our biggest hopes and dreams into often aren't our favorite.
Well, they're not broken parts.
That's right. I would like, Hester, to backtrack to the question you asked Mark a little bit about how process can drive aesthetic. And and we were talking about this a little bit before these conversations, how while both of our media have a lot of technical elements of them, and there certainly are parts of the process to learn, I feel like we've both met photographers and potters alike who are masters of the craft, but perhaps don't have an eye or an aesthetic that is interesting, and vice versa. And I think that some of my most rewarding artistic experiences have been teaching, when very passionate artists will come to a new medium and use their aesthetic, but perhaps not having a skill set or a technique based in that medium. And sometimes the things that people who are new to a medium come up with are really refreshing and exciting.
So I like that. I talked about it with another artist. Is there a moment, and either of you can answer that, because I think you're both very skillful, is there a moment that you feel you got technically too good for the expression you want to? Or doesn't that play?
I think you can overdo it. I do that sometimes. I see it. I put more work and technique into it than the result requires, I think. Sometimes a little rougher looking, a little less glitzy is a more appealing photograph. So.
Absolutely. I think that I often get carried away with the firing process. And it's such a... Firing wood kilns is... it's exciting, it's dramatic. And there is sometimes a temptation to fire too hot, or fire too long. And in pursuit of excellence, you can go too far. I would say I like being on that side of the spectrum, pushing the work to see what's possible, knowing that sometimes it is at the expense either of losing pieces technically or going beyond the aesthetic that you're looking for. And then sometimes you have to pull back from that.
Mark, you talked about excitement. So you mentioned in your statement you want to convey this excitement that you have when you look through the lens. How do you manage to do that? Or do you feel you have?
Well, it's something I'm still pursuing. I think every now and then I get pretty close, but it's, consistently there's a lot of things I do in my my workflow, the way I do work, the way I set the camera up, what times of the day and situations I choose to make the exposure, and what I do with it afterwards. And
how do you go from that uncontrolled environment with people, coolers, blue tarps, to a photograph that is really pristine and champions the car and all its chrome and shininess and voluptuous shapes, if I can say that?
Well, I like to say that it's the setup in the camera, and then the rest of it is kind of like sports photography. You're looking for the angles and the openings and seeing where the crowd's going and going the other place, seeing where the light is and getting there before everyone else gets there. That's another thing. The earlier in the morning you get to an outside venue, the better you are. And just trying to deal with it that way, I think. So.
Tell us a little bit about your subject matter. So this is a body of work of vintage cars. Is that your specialty, or is that one of the things you...
I think it's probably my specialty right now. I've been focused a lot on the last 9 years, I guess. I do a lot of other photography, but I don't feel like I'm... It's like we were talking about, they have this tool set that you learn to use, then you use it to try to get to the image you want. And so with the cars, I've done that enough. I can get pretty darn close. I know when I'm going to get good results. I know when I'll walk away and there wasn't anything good today. But with my other photography, I'm lower down on the learning curve yet. I spent the whole summer doing landscapes, and I've got a couple of good ones, but there's some things to learn.
Why vintage cars? I mean, to make an image, you could take basically anything. Right. Is it just because you like cars, or what elements attracts you in cars that
Well, the cars of the era I choose, from essentially the 1920s to the 1960s, late 60s, early 70s, have a lot of beauty in the bodywork and design. They're different. They don't all look alike. They get lots of detail. I'm very knowledgeable that the history of cars of that era, lived through it and owned a lot of them. And it's definitely a passion. I see in that there's incredible beauty in the detail and the lines of the car. It's like sailing ships have what they call sheer along the hull. Well, cars have the same sorts of things that this era, particularly the curves and the shapes and the patterns.
So it's really your love of cars as
Oh
well.
yeah, no, I think it's like Sam was saying. You have a passion that shows that. I think that's the basis of doing good work, is shooting something you're excited about. If you're going and trying to make art out of something you don't feel anything for it, it's usually a pretty dismal experience.
So Sam, we've seen you earlier, fairly recently in August with the eclipse. Still going?
Seeing the total solar eclipse was one of the most aesthetically inspiring events that I've ever experienced. And so it's just starting. I've had one Anagama firing since the eclipse, and I feel like I've made some of my best work of my career as a result. I'm trying a few new techniques, but I really feel this is the case of being driven by the experience. And that's kind of an exciting those are exciting parameters from which to make art.
So then how did you have used this imagery for a while? So
yes.
Where was the genesis of it prior to the eclipse?
So the imagery, I've always been fascinated by astronomy. And the imagery, I used specifically eclipse imagery, but I think I was thinking more general, as referencing the stars and referencing the cosmos, and almost intentionally not trying to be too literal, using constellations or specifically an eclipse or a nova, and then experiencing the eclipse. It was almost this slap my forehead moment, why not? And so the pieces that I made since, and a lot of them are on the wall in the gallery too, are I think a little more literal and more representative of what I saw than what I think it might look like. I had seen partial eclipses and been blown away by those experiences, but really didn't compare. And so I feel like just taking it a little bit more literally and being more specific with the marks that I was making made them more interesting aesthetically.
Well, so how would you relate the negative space that you're creating for the fire and all that to the design element? What about that? I mean, obviously that design element appeals to you too.
It was the case that when I saw the eclipse, it was the negative space that was so captivating. I mean, the rays shooting out of the eclipse were beautiful, but what I realized, I was really, even before I had witnessed the eclipse, the part of my plates and the part of these pieces that appealed to me the most were the void, that were surrounded by all of the intense effects. And I think in this show, my most successful piece, and perhaps one of my favorite pieces of my career, is the eclipse, the large eclipse platter in the Gallery 2. And there was just a balance of that negative space with the brightness that I feel is what I witnessed seeing the eclipse. And what's been really rewarding about that, Cynthia, is the people who look at my work have been really vocalizing that. And it's not that important to me that people have the same reaction from my work that I get or that I'm trying to put into the work. But it's great to see an intense reaction. And when people describe it in those terms, that feels good. And that excites me. And it makes me want to make more, to be sure.
Yeah. Well, so then I kind of have the same question for Mark then, because it seems like you're playing with very similar patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So with your pieces, so are the kind of the information that you've cut out of your photograph just as important to the photograph itself?
Oh yeah. It's a matter of what you shoot and what you take out. You know, it's not everything. It's all, especially the kind of work I do. It's very difficult to get a pristine shot. There's always something in there you don't want. You just try to minimize it. And so you have to deal with it.
So you're cropping at the time you're shooting.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
A lot of these images are like a quarter or a third of a frame because there's so much junk, and I try to get as much out as possible.
Yeah, wow.
It's not easy.
Sam, your work has such a vivid expression of your personal experiences on not only the Celestial series, but your downhill flow series, since I know you're a skateboarder and snowboarder. Are you still making the downhill flow series, and is there another part of your life that, besides those two, that shows up in your work?
Yes, I am still making that body of work, and I really enjoy making it. That body of work is much more about altering the form and the kind of the breadth of the pieces. I feel like this deep focus body of work is using the ceramic vessel as a canvas to show off pattern and to create depth that perhaps doesn't exist, that isn't there. Whereas the downhill flow series is very much about using alterations in a classical form to affect the way that the fire moves over a piece. And those are kind of the two main bodies of work that I'm making these days. And that's very different than how I used to work even just 5 years ago. I'm really excited by both of these bodies of work, and so when I sit down at the wheel now, it feels like I want to see what's coming next. And I don't... This is also, for the past 5 years, the first time I've really tried to put a lot of my aesthetic into the work before the firings. And so I've been trying to really take responsibility for everything that goes into the work. And staying within those two bodies of work, I feel has, it's just allowed me to achieve excellence in the individual pieces that I don't feel like my other work was achieving. So yes, those are pretty much the two veins in which I'm working now. I will make utilitarian pieces for friends and family, but these are the pieces that I'm most excited about. And for the most part, that's all I'm making right now.
Mark, can you remember the first photograph you made that you were really happy with, and how did you get from there to where you are now?
Wow. That's a tough one. I think in the digital age, it was probably... I'm trying to think. Must have been around 2011 or 2012. I got a shot and was really good. And it surprised me. It wasn't one of the ones I was expecting to be good. I tried to think of what I did different. What are the things about that made it good? And I think that's kind of the learning process.
Did you know what you did differently, and were you able to
I was able to identify some of the factors that play into it. And a lot of it's the light. I mean, the light itself has to be really good to make a really good photograph in this kind of work. So I was always conscious of that, but I'm very much more conscious now. There's like little microclimates of light going on in the same place. So
these shows often are outside in meadows and
parks, yeah.
parks and that kind of stuff in the summer.
Right.
So you're shooting in the summer and processing in the winter? Or?
No, I shoot from typically February, March through November. There's a lot of indoor shows I go to. It's much harder to get a good result in an indoor show. You have to kind of use the fact that you've got all these weird lights overhead. It's a part of the art because you can't take them out once they're in there. So, and also it's the lighting in the indoor facilities is a mixture of different kinds of light. It's not one kind, so they all have different wavelengths of light. have different color shifts, and so you got to come up with some average that looks halfway good. So it's not pretty, but outdoors is the best. Outdoors and open shade early in the morning for a whole bunch of reasons. All my best shots are, I'd say 90% of my really good shots come in that situation.
So would you say that, no, I can't ask you a yes or no question. What would be your biggest challenge in photographing on the show? Is it the light or the smudge, the detritus?
I think it's all the detritus. We try this all around. Yeah. That's probably the big thing. A lot of shots I don't take because that'd be great if it wasn't for that. You see people they're proud of their car, especially at lower level shows. So they get like a 24 by 36 inch piece of poster board and write all the things that they've done. Then they put it right in front of the car so you can't see the car.
Do you at times ask them to remove that temporarily so you can make
I would if they're around, but typically you go to these shows and their owners are off looking at other cars. So they've got their cooler and their picnic there, but you don't see the owners around.
Cynthia, did you have another question?
I have one more question about, you talk about morning light, and I'm assuming it's because of the angle. Is late afternoon light equally as good?
It can be as good, but quite often the shows wrap up at 4 or 5, especially in the summer when it's hot. But the morning light's the best for sure people. And I think it's a little softer than the evening light sometimes, a little harsher.
Yeah, what's your biggest challenge, Sam?
I think my biggest challenge is editing the work. I've tried as an artist to be quite disciplined about the work that I show and send out into the world, but I think I'm still not my own best critic, and I often will hold on to pieces and then rediscover them several years later and see things in them that I perhaps didn't originally. And right now, I have a bit of a dilemma that I'm looking at some of my older work that I thought was my best work. I got it out into the world. It perhaps is in galleries, and I'm looking at it now a few years later saying, it's not really my best work anymore. And so I feel like I did a lot of exploring and experimenting early on, finding clay bodies, finding firing techniques. And I don't do that quite as much anymore. I think I'm exploring now more with the aesthetic itself. And it's more of a challenge to say this piece is not successful because I don't like how it looks versus this piece is not successful because it's cracked. And so an interesting question that I've been asked is, what is your most important tool? And right now it's my shard pile.
Your what?
My shard pile. The pieces that don't go out into the world. So I think that editing is a really important part of being being an artist. And it's interesting to hear Mark describe photography in that sense, because many people will, in the digital age, know that experience of taking lots of photographs. And I approach ceramics in a similar way. I make a lot of pots, and I don't put a lot of those pots out into the world.
What do you do with all of those?
I break a lot of them. I have a beautiful shard pile. And I have some that are kicking around in my garden.
Have you ever broken a pot that you would find a shard of later that you shouldn't have broken? Yeah.
Probably. I guess no. I haven't gone and said, oh, I really shouldn't have smashed that one. But I have. When I first started wood firing, I was so enamored by the really dramatic effects that I think I let a lot of the quieter surfaces, I missed them. And so if a piece wasn't really intense, I have a wood fire partner in crime who describes these really loud surfaces as the tarty party dress. Lots of contrast, red, black, yellow. And that is an expression of beauty, but I find a lot of beauty in the quieter pieces now that I didn't used to. And so if anything, I think I'm probably saving more of the pieces that aren't quite as loud.
So Mark, the nature of digital photography is such that you don't have to break it like Sam does, but what do you do with things that you think, oh gosh, this is
You
good?
hit delete.
You delete them?
Yeah, but there's some I periodically go back, look at old photos and find treasures. I see others that are just total garbage, so I delete them. I mean, how did I get this far? Kind of thing.
But you have that digital information on your computer. Does that remain forever?
No, I delete the whole file is gone. I don't do enough of it, actually. I think the tendency to hang on to things. It's like Sam said, going back through your old work, you see how you've grown, how you've gotten better. You see ones that you didn't know what to do with when you took it, and now you think, I know I can fix that. I can make that work.
Yeah.
And other things you thought was your primo photos now, that's kind of cheesy. I wonder how I got by with that. I'd like to make a plug for the Willamette Photo Arts Guild, who I joined 2 years ago. My work has improved tremendously. The critique of my fellow photographers and talking with them, even more, looking at their work. We have a night we all get together and look at work, and it's like, I've learned so much just by looking at what other people do and how they get their results. They're exciting.
So what's the difference between feedback that you get out of a group of peers, fellow photographers, than you would get out of standing there in front and say, oh, this is beautiful? Which?
Well, it says two different kinds of feedback. One is just appreciation. The other is people that appreciate not just the image, but how it got. They have some feeling of how it got there, or they want to know how you got to that. And in the process of telling them, I think you learn. Also, it's like when I used to teach photography. You learn as much teaching people as you do taking a class. It's amazing. They force you to figure things out and explain things that you knew but never explained to yourself.
So, Sam, you mentioned earlier that you were a Harriman studio partner and that you like getting together on these kind of things. So tell us, is it important for the lay person to know the difference between an anagama kiln and a Meyer gamma kiln?
I've been describing some changes I've been experiencing in my career, and I think had you asked me that question a decade ago, I would have said absolutely. It's very important and it's critical that someone understand the process of how this work was made in order for them to appreciate the work. I have the opposite answer now. I would like for people to be drawn to my work for what it is, for the way that it makes them feel and for the aesthetic that it strikes, and then have them pulled into the process from the piece. Say, well, this is fascinating. Why is one side glossy and one side matte? What creates these drippy lines? And for me, it is no longer important that people know anything about the wood firing or wheel throwing process. And I think that once I sort of let go of that, my work really took off and got a lot better as a result. I am still very eager to discuss the wood fire process, and I love to speak with potters and non-potters alike about all of the different effects and what created those effects. But one of my best teachers gave me the challenge that if, as an artist and a potter, if I can't make excellent work with just a random stoneware body and a white glaze and a black glaze, I have no business trying to make good work with a process as complicated as wood firing. And I still take that to heart. I think that my mentor does tend to get very much wrapped up in the process, and sometimes at the expense of the finished pieces. And I've tried to stay true to, while I feel like I have to be passionate and remain enthusiastic and intense with the firing process, many potters I fire with say, I would do this and have no pots in the kiln. I'm so enamored with the pieces as they come out of the kiln, that's what's driving my work. It's interesting, I was reading my artist statement, I think I need to update it. It really used to be very much the process itself that drove my work, and I would be chasing after certain wood-fired effects, and I feel that's less the case now.
Does that go for you too, Mark, that the process isn't so important, or
I think the process is important to me, but I don't think it's important to the viewer at all. They have to accept it for what it is. There is no, if there was an explanation book beside it saying how you did it, they wouldn't read it. So
right.
you have to let them, the art takes on a new life with someone else. It is what it is for them.
So you're most excited about the final product?
Yeah.
And that goes for you too, Sam?
Yes.
Gosh, we're so off base at the art center. We say, oh,
well, I think that the process is why we make art, and it is certainly why we choose the processes that we do choose. But at least to achieve a sense of depth, I think that the product has to be in mind throughout the entire process. And for me, that doesn't mean I don't lose myself in the process. That absolutely is the case. And one of the reasons why I love wheel throwing and wood firing is that just the meditative nature of those activities, one can lose themselves in the process. But I feel like myself and my peers do approach the entirety of wood-fired ceramics with an intention and with the goal of creating these pots. And I think that's important. So it is perhaps process-driven, but always with an eye on the product. If that makes sense.
So I want to change gears entirely because we've been talking a while and we could talk for another hour or so, but that's not our intention here. So here's my last question. If money or space was not something you'd have to think about, what artwork would you like to own?
I love this question. So you surprised me with this question this summer at the Eclipse show, and I sort of very quickly answered one of Degas' ballerinas. I had just seen some of those pieces and was moved to the core. But I had a little time to think a little more about it, and I didn't think that answer really took into account the scale part of your question. One of my favorite artists, who is a ceramic artist, is Jun Kaneko, and he has made, in the 20th century, some of the most impressive large-scale ceramic sculptures that I think have ever been made. Actually, if you'd hold this, Mark.
Sure.
Brought a picture of the piece that I would have in my collection. So you can see this is a flatbed semi-truck carrying what these are called dongos, and they are closed ceramic forms. They're closed ceramic forms that he then will glaze the outside of. And these were fired in a huge brick kiln in Omaha, Nebraska. And then for me, it's just a wonderful balance of technical virtuosity, aesthetic depth, and also it's the kind of art that's accessible to anybody. People can look at these, be absolutely floored by them, anybody. And and so these are examples of both large scale, they're really expensive, and just really well done.
Would you say they're 6-7 feet tall?
Oh, much bigger than that. I think these ones are, what does it say? These ones are 11.5 feet tall, and those aren't as large as they're massive. They would fill the space gradually.
Would be a sizable presence.
That's right. And it's funny, there's an expression as you're learning different art processes. If you can't make it good, make it big. If you can't make it big, paint it red. Or in ceramics, glaze it blue. Jun Kaneko makes it good, makes it big, and glazes it blue. and nails it. So that's why I chose that piece. That's great.
All right, lovely. Mark, would you answer to this tricky question?
Yeah, it's very tricky. I thought about it a long time. I've got the 3 levels of possibilities. I'm going to go for broke, take you literally, what you said. And so, a little bit of history. On the west coast of this country, since the mid-1800s, there have been lumber mills up and down the coast. And they would take raw logs and make them into 2x4s and lumber for construction. They would be shipped to San Francisco. That lumber got to San Francisco on what are called coastal schooners of 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 masted schooners that I think are incredibly beautiful. And they were a tool of a business. But none of them survived. So if I had unlimited funds, I'd have someone, the plan still exists, I'd have them build one just so they could look at it because the pictures are just gorgeous. That's kind of mine.
All right. All right. Well, I would like to thank you both for making artwork, for spending your time with us, answering all these questions, and think about it. Please keep doing all those things. Thank you. Thanks for
the opportunity.
The Corvallis Art Center is such an amazing location, and as we said, the opportunity to get out into the community and discuss the art, and to have a place where you can regularly go and see excellent art is a treat. So we thank you for your efforts, and it is an honor to show here. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, folks.
Love your work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.